Well, the conflict in the Middle East isn't just causing global concern in the political and diplomatic arena. There's also increasing apprehension about the effect it could have on the global economy. If history is any guide, the conflict has the potential to send financial shockwaves far beyond the Middle East.
Empty highways stretching for miles across Germany and other Western European countries. That was in 1973 during the oil crisis. During the Yom Kippur War between Israel on one side and Egypt and Syria on the other, Arab states had stopped supplying the West with crude oil. After the Hamas terror attack on Israel and the Israeli retaliatory strikes in the Gaza Strip, many wonder, will the world once again face a scenario of oil scarcity? The price of oil rose after the Hamas attack. However, it has since normalized. And unlike 50 years ago, experts today do not see a united front of the Arab oil-producing countries against the West.
Today, we do not have a cartel. Instead, we have highly diverging interests even within the camp of the Gulf states, especially between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this conflict did not exist in the past. That is to say, we are not currently expecting a situation like we had in 1973.
Another reason, a more globally interconnected economy. Arab states are shareholders with considerable interest in corporations in Europe and the U.S., including in non-oil related firms like Volkswagen, Daimler, or Siemens. However, an escalation of the conflict could fundamentally change the situation. For example, in the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow strait, just over 30 miles wide, is controlled by Iran, considered to be the main supporter of Hamas and Hezbollah. 20% of the entire global oil production must pass through here. In the past, Iran has repeatedly threatened to block the strait and has impeded the passage of tankers from Western countries. A military escalation could trigger Iran to step in again and cause the global economy to collapse.
The risk of a recession in the Eurozone cannot be ruled out due to an escalating conflict, not at all, simply because the Eurozone with its high energy demand is primarily dependent on the Gulf states and the Middle East as a whole.
Countries with energy-intensive and processing industries, like Germany, would be particularly affected.
Right, let's discuss this further with Rob Watts from DW Business. Good to see you, mate. Why is it so important to the global economy that this Israel-Hamas war doesn't escalate further?
Because it's as simple as the further the conflict spreads, the bigger the impact for the global economy. And we know what that impact can be because we can look at past conflicts, but also because economists have been working their way through all of these various scenarios and looking at the potential impact that it could have. And what they're treating as, I suppose, the worst realistic scenario is that we not only have it spreading beyond the existing territory of Israel and Gaza, but into the wider region, and then ultimately a direct war between Israel and Iran. And that puts various factors into play, but most crucially, oil and global shipping. Iran has control of the Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of global oil and all manner of other non-oil products passes, but also Iranian oil is one of the few things that's keeping oil prices at a reasonable level at the moment. So disruption to that would be a big problem. And actually, economists at Bloomberg have been crunching the numbers on this. They believe that in the worst-case scenario, $1 trillion could be wiped off the global economy in 1 year. If that were to happen, we could see oil at $150 a barrel. At the moment, it's around $90 a barrel. It's never been that high.
So you paint a picture of a pretty big problem, but it's not the only problem, because many parts of the world are still dealing with the fallout from the Ukraine war and the pandemic. Does this war in the Middle East now affect those economic recoveries that are just underway?
Again, it all depends on the degree of escalation, but we know that those recoveries are very fragile. Here in the Eurozone, for example, and in the United States, they're walking a tightrope between getting inflation down and not sending their own economies into a recession. And it would only really take a tremor to knock them off that tightrope. And something like oil prices surging and global shipping being disrupted are exactly the sort of tremor that could do that, because both of those things are inflationary. It becomes more expensive to produce things, but it also becomes more expensive to send those things around the world. And then even if you look at, much poorer countries, emerging economies are much more vulnerable to fluctuations in energy prices. So really, it's the last thing that recovering economies need right now.
In political terms, we're seeing countries having to pick sides in the conflict, I guess economically as well. What does that mean in how these countries will then trade with each other?
Well, this is quite a familiar story from the past couple of years, isn't it? And we've seen how this dynamic plays out. As countries have been falling in behind Ukraine and behind Russia, they've become reluctant to trade with other nations with whom they have ideological differences. This brings in one of the big buzzwords of the global economy at the moment, deglobalisation. For a long time, the ethos was trade with whoever you want, get yourself the best deal. It doesn't matter if you're buying stuff from, an oppressive regime on the other side of the world. But that's really flipped on its head in the last couple of years, most noticeably with the US trading less with China and doing more trade with Canada and Mexico, its neighbours and people that it's got better relations with. You can expect what's happening in the Middle East to accelerate that splintering as countries just try to avoid doing trade with other nations who they fear might use that trade as its own kind of weapon.
It's a complicated story, Rob, but thanks for clearing it up for us. Rob Watts from DW Business.